Welcome to the deep dive. We're all about exploring some pretty cool and thought-provoking ideas. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something that's fascinated people forever: consciousness.
Yeah, it's like one of those big mysteries, right?
It really is. And we're going to be looking at it through the lens of some groundbreaking research by Dennis LeBihon.
Oh, I know his work.
Huh.
His article, From Black Holes, Entropy to Consciousness, is like mind-blowing.
Definitely mind-blowing. He suggests that our conscious experience might actually be, get this, a kind of hologram.
A hologram, wow. Okay, I'm hooked already.
Me too. He draws some fascinating parallels between the brain and, believe it or not, black holes.
Black holes, now that's taking things to a whole other level.
Exactly. So get ready for some serious mind-bending stuff.
I am. So where do we even begin with this? It sounds pretty complex.
Well, LeBihon starts by talking about how Einstein's theory of relativity might actually apply to the brain.
Relativity in the brain.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to need you to break that down for me.
Sure. So just like the speed of light is a limit in the universe, there's a speed limit in our brains too. It's the speed at which nerve impulses travel.
Okay, that makes sense. Our brains can only process information so fast, right?
Exactly. And just like in the universe, this speed limit creates a kind of space-time, but this time it's in our brains. It's what Le Bihan calls connectome space-time.
Connectome space-time. Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So it's like our brains have their own little universe with its own rules of physics.
That's a great way to put it. And within this connectome space-time, information flows along pathways called brain lines, kind of like highways of neural activity.
Brain lines, highways of neural activity. I like that. But how does all this relate to consciousness?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Le Bihan proposes that brain activity actually warps this connectome spacetime, kind of like gravity warps spacetime in the universe.
Hold on. So our thoughts are actually creating tiny gravitational fields in our brains.
That's the idea. And the more intense the brain activity, the greater the warping, the greater the curvature.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see the connection to consciousness. The more brain activity, the more warping, the more aware we become. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Le Bihan suggests that this curvature, this warping of connectome spacetime, could actually be the key to consciousness. It's like the brain's way of organizing and prioritizing information, bringing certain things into our conscious awareness.
So are you saying that thoughts and feelings that don't create enough of this curvature just don't reach our consciousness?
That's one way to think about it. It might explain things like subliminal messages. We know they're there, but we don't consciously register them. Maybe they just don't create enough of a gravitational pull to warp our connectome spacetime.
Wow, that's a pretty wild concept, but it kind of makes sense. Okay, so we've got relativity, we've got gravity. Now, where do those black holes come in?
Well, Le Bihan asks a pretty intriguing question. What would happen if we could compress the human brain to the density of a black hole? It's just a thought experiment, of course.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound very pleasant.
Definitely not. But here's the thing. When he did the calculations, he found that the brain's information capacity is surprisingly close to the theoretical limit of a black hole of the same size.
Wait, are you saying my brain is practically a black hole when it comes to information storage?
Well, not quite. It's more like our brains are operating at near black hole levels of efficiency when it comes to storing and processing information.
That is mind-blowing.
And this connects to something else that's pretty fascinating. During evolution, the brain's surface area, especially the part called the cerebral cortex, has increased massively.
Right, all those wrinkles. Like our brains were trying to pack in as much surface area as possible.
Exactly. It's like nature was trying to maximize information storage to push the limits of what's possible within the confines of our skulls.
So our brains are these incredibly complex, efficient information processors, working at near black hole levels of density. I'm starting to see where Le Bihan is going with this.
And this leads us to another mind-bending concept from physics, the holographic principle.
Okay, I've heard of holograms, but what's the holographic principle?
It's the idea that three-dimensional information can actually be encoded on a two-dimensional surface, like those holographic stickers you see, where a 3D image pops out from a flat surface.
Right, right. So how does that relate to the brain?
Well, think about our vision. We have two 2D images from our retinas, but somehow our brains create a seamless 3D experience of the world.
Wow, that's true. We take it for granted, but it's actually pretty incredible.
It is, and it suggests that our brains might be processing information holographically, storing vast amounts of data on the 2D surfaces of our neurons.
So you're saying our 3D perception of the world might actually be a kind of holographic projection created by our brains.
That's the essence of Le Bihan's argument. He suggests that consciousness itself might be a fifth dimension of the connectome, emerging from the four dimensions of space-time we've been talking about.
A fifth dimension? Okay, now you're really blowing my mind.
I know, it's pretty wild. But it's a fascinating concept that could potentially revolutionize our understanding of consciousness. And believe it or not, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, I can't wait to dive deeper.
You know, when we left off talking about consciousness as a fifth dimension, I have to admit I'm still wrapping my head around that one.
Yeah, it's definitely a mind bender, but it's also, like, incredibly exciting. It opens up so many new ways of thinking about consciousness.
It really does. And I'm particularly intrigued by the idea that we might actually be able to measure consciousness. I mean, if it's a dimension, shouldn't we be able to quantify it somehow?
That's exactly what Le Bihan proposes. He suggests using a concept from physics called entropy as a way to measure consciousness.
Entropy. Okay, that rings a bell. Didn't we talk about that in relation to black hole?
We did. It's a measure of disorder or randomness in a system. And in the context of the brain, it reflects the diversity of information being exchanged between different areas.
So a brain with higher entropy would have more complex information flow, like more things happening at once.
Precisely. And Le Bihan believes that this complexity of information flow could be linked to a richer conscious experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So a brain in a coma, for example, would have very low entropy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because there's very little communication happening between different areas of the brain.
But what about a brain that's highly focused on a task? Would that have high or low entropy?
Well, that's a bit of a tricky one. You might think a focused brain would have lower entropy because the information flow is more directed, more streamlined.
Right, like a laser beam, very precise and targeted.
Exactly. But it also depends on the complexity of the task. Some tasks require a lot of integration of information from different brain areas, which could lead to higher entropy even though the brain is focused.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about the amount of information, but also the way it's being processed and integrated.
Exactly. And that's where Le Bihan's concept of connectome curvature comes back into play.
Right, that warping of brain space-time we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Le Bihan proposes that this curvature might act like a kind of filter, shaping which information reaches our conscious awareness.
So information that creates more curvature, more of a gravitational pull, is more likely to become conscious.
That's the idea. And he believes that by combining measurements of entropy and curvature, we could get a much more accurate picture of consciousness.
Okay, but how do we actually measure these things in a living brain?
Well, researchers are using brain imaging techniques like fMRI and DTI to study entropy and connectivity in the brain.
Right, fMRI shows us which areas are active, and DTI maps the connections between them. It's like seeing the brain's traffic patterns in real time.
Exactly. And a group of researchers led by Gilson have developed a method to calculate what they call the entropy production rate of the brain.
Entropy production rate, what does that mean?
It takes into account both the spontaneous activity in different brain areas and the strength of the connections between them.
So it's a measure of how much information is being generated and how efficiently it's being shared across the brain.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that they found a correlation between this entropy production rate and different states of consciousness.
Really? So they can actually see differences in entropy that correspond to, say, being awake versus being asleep.
Yes. They've shown that the entropy production rate is highest during wakefulness, lower during sleep, and even lower during anesthesia.
That's amazing. So we're actually getting closer to having a way to quantify consciousness.
We are. And Le Bihan believes that by incorporating the concept of connectome curvature into these measurements, we could make them even more precise.
So we could potentially map consciousness, see it in action within the brain.
It's a possibility. And it could have incredible implications for understanding and treating conditions like coma, vegetative states, and even mental illnesses.
This is all so mind-blowing, but I have to ask, if consciousness is an emergent property of the whole brain, is there any one part that's more important than the others?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another fascinating aspect of Le Bihan's research, the idea of switches for consciousness.
Switches, like something that turns consciousness on and off.
That's the basic idea. Le Bihan suggests that certain brain structures, like the thalamus and the brainstem, might play a crucial role in controlling the overall level of connectome curvature.
So these structures are like the master conductors of the brain's symphony, regulating the flow of information and shaping our conscious experience.
Exactly. And there's some intriguing evidence to support this idea. Researchers have found that stimulating the thalamus in anesthetized animals can actually bring them back to consciousness.
Wait, really? They can wake up animals by stimulating a specific part of the brain?
Yes, it's pretty incredible. And it suggests that these structures might be key to turning consciousness on and off.
Wow. So we've got entropy, curvature, brain switches. It's a lot to take in, but it's starting to paint a pretty incredible picture of consciousness.
It is. And it highlights just how complex and dynamic consciousness really is. But this exploration wouldn't be complete without considering the potential for manipulating consciousness. Think about the ethical implications, the possibilities, and even the potential dangers.
That's a whole other can of worms, and one that we definitely need to explore further. So let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive. So we've been talking about this idea of consciousness as like a fifth dimension, this
Mhm.
connectome curvature, and now even brain switches controlling it all. It's pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, it really challenges how we traditionally think about consciousness. It's not just some mysterious, intangible thing. It's a product of our brains,
Yeah.
a physical process that we might be able to measure and even manipulate.
And that's where things start to get a little unsettling, right? I mean, the idea that we could actually control someone's conscious experience that's straight out of science fiction.
It is, and it raises a lot of ethical questions that we need to grapple with
Sure.
before these technologies become a reality.
Right, like if we could stimulate someone's thalamus to wake them up from a coma, would that really be restoring their consciousness or would it be something else entirely?
That's a profound question,
Yeah.
and there's no easy answer. We need to consider the potential benefits, but also the potential harms, and make sure we're proceeding with caution and a deep respect for human autonomy.
I mean, imagine a world where we could implant memories or erase traumatic experiences. It sounds fascinating, but also terrifying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's crucial that we have these conversations now while these technologies are still in their infancy. We need to involve not just scientists, but ethicists, philosophers, and the public at large to guide the development and use of these tools responsibly.
It's like we're standing at the edge of a new frontier, and we need to decide what kind of world we want to create with these powerful new tools.
Exactly. And we need to remember that with great power comes great responsibility.
So, where do we go from here? How do we navigate this uncharted territory of consciousness and ensure that we use these tools for good?
I think the first step is education. We need to make sure that people understand the science, the potential benefits and the potential risks, so that they can participate in informed discussions and decision-making.
Absolutely. We need to demystify consciousness and make it clear that it's not some magical phenomenon. It's a product of our brains, and it's governed by the laws of physics and information.
And as we continue to learn more about those laws, we'll gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe around us.
This whole deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've explored some mind-bending concepts and really pushed the boundaries of our understanding of what it means to be conscious.
It's been a privilege to explore these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as we have.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into consciousness, we want to leave you with this thought. The human brain is the most complex object in the known universe, and we're only just beginning to unlock its secrets.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop marveling at the wonders of the human mind.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds open and those brains buzzing.